Dear all, welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Quad, this important, uh, shall we call the spearhead of US Indo-Pacific strategy, where the US is trying to build a coalition that will be able to balance and contain China. The goal of the Indo-Pacific strategy is essentially to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open for trade, help it prosper, and basically, these are all code words to ensure that China does not establish its hegemony in in Asia, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So the goal of the United States, at least, is to continue its dominance in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe, and in the Middle East. And the one geographic area where China is competing hard with the US is the Asia Pacific region, the Indo Pacific, as we now call it. And this is the region where the United States is building alliances to ensure that China does not become a hegemonic power in Southeast Asia. So that is the goal of the Quad. And there are reasons why the members of the Quad are members of the Quad, such as Australia and Japan, as well as India, and we'll talk about that. But it appears to me that the Quad has lost a little bit of its fizz, the enthusiasm, the excitement, the activities and the joint projects, military exercises, naval exercises, all of that that we saw in 2023. We see very little of that in 2024. Part of it is because both India as well as the United States are going through some very intense and complicated election processes. But nevertheless, it does appear to some extent that the Quad has lost its fizz. So in this conversation, I'm going to try and explore this idea and basically ask the question, has the Quad lost its fizz? Or is it continuing to remain as relevant and as vibrant in the geopolitics of Asia and the Indo-Pacific region or not? But before that, do subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with all your friends and social political network. I also want to thank all of you who have supported Khanversations. So far, Khanversations has achieved 50,000 subscribers for an academic. That is, I think, if I may say so myself, an admirable achievement, and that would not have been possible for all the support that I get from all of you, especially those in India and the Indian diaspora, who constitute about 70% of the viewership. So thank you very much for supporting Khanversations. So why do I think that the Quad has lost its fizz? So the foreign ministers had a summit in Tokyo just a day ago, where the foreign ministers of Japan, Australia, India, and the United States met and discussed. And so the readouts are available. I will share the link to the overall readout of all the four, as well as which also includes India's point of view that was shared at the convention, at the conference. But as I was saying, that the goal of the United States is to build allies so it can prevent China's military domination in the region. We know as it is that in sheer numbers now, China has a bigger navy than the United States, but is it more capable and more forceful than the combined navies of the United States, India, Japan, as well as Australia? And the GDP of these four countries is exactly twice that of China. So the economic power of the Quad, the naval and military power of the Quad far exceeds that of China. It's not on parity, it's way above China. So it clearly dominates China, and therefore it prevents China from achieving some of its hegemonic goals in the region. Now, the United States has many interests, and it seeks to influence politics nearly in every country and all over the world. So, U.S. is involved in the Russia-Ukraine war. Billions of dollars of American taxpayer money is being saved or spent there to save Ukraine from Russia. The U.S. is spending billions of dollars to advance Israeli interests in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So the U.S. Essentially cannot unleash all its military and economic power and diplomatic power in Southeast Asia. And therefore, it needs partners like Japan and Australia, South Korea and India and Philippines and all the other countries who are willing to partner with the United States. For Japan, Japan has two threats in the region. One is Russia, and the other is China to some extent, or to a lesser extent, North Korea. And the United States is a military partner that it hopes will continue to guarantee Japanese security. As far as Australia is concerned, I mean, Australia is a member of the Western worldview, the Western world, and it has been a US partner in many wars. And it also allies very closely with the US, not just in the Quad, but also in AUKUS, another Anglo partnership with UK and the US, as well as the Five Eyes partnership, which is another alliance, an intelligence sharing alliance of English-speaking countries that include Australia, the US, UK, Canada, and New Zealand. For India, it's very tricky because India does need the support of the Quad for many other reasons, partly as a vehicle for India's technological and economic development. It sees Japan and the United States as strategic partners. For example, Dr. Jaishankar's address in Japan essentially said that we hope that by 2037, Japanese investments in India will reach $47 billion. And so Quad is another vehicle for India to solicit foreign direct investment, especially from Japan and the US. And Japanese investments would also mean the Japanese technology and manufacturing capacity is developed in India. And this is also their way to balance China, which has been threatening India's borders since 2020, especially after the Galwan episode and then the episode in Arunachal Pradesh in 2022. So all these countries have a reason to come together, and the primary reason is the aggression. Except the United States, all these countries feel an aggressive posture from China that threatens them. The US goal is different. The US sees China as a peer competitor which is challenging its domination. For what? So the US is not defending its territory or its assets in the region. The US is defending its hegemony and its domination in the region. Whereas Japan and Australia, to a great extent, and India are actually afraid of China, especially with India, which fears that China has aspirations to India's territory. It already occupies some territory in Aksai Chin. So that is how the Quad has progressed. But for various reasons, India has not allowed it to become a military alliance. The US wants it to become a military alliance where everyone is committed, like in NATO, to protect each other, because that will then make all these countries fully dependent on the United States for their security and fully, shall we say, embedded in the US ecosystem, US defense ecosystem. Australia and Japan are already there, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but India is not. India is trying to maintain strategic autonomy. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Moscow to meet Putin to show that we are not completely just aligned with the West. We also have friends in Russia. And more importantly, in July alone, as I have done in my previous conversation, Dr. Jaishankar has met with the Chinese foreign minister twice, Wang Yi, and there seems to be some progress in normalizing the situation on the border. And if the border situation is normalized, you can expect very rapid growth of India-China's economic relations. China is already India's important trade partner, the biggest trading partner. The interesting aspect is that while these four countries are all coming together ostensibly to essentially keep China down, while China says this is a strategy to, especially the West, seeking to prevent China's development. All of these four countries have China as their major trading partner. China is a big trading partner for Japan. It is the third biggest trading partner for the United States, the biggest trading partner for India. So it is interesting and ironic that they see China as a military competitor, but a trading partner. So when they talk about China, they have to maintain this aura that we are not trying to impose ourselves on you. We're not trying to limit your growth. We just want to protect the region from your aggression. So that is the posture. But in many ways, I will not be surprised if a serious conversation with strategic thinkers in China will show that the Chinese have the same fear of the Quad and other activities of the United States in the region that I will mention soon, that Russia has of the expansion of NATO in the East. Just as NATO has expanded eastward and basically created a security dilemma for Russia, the emergence of Quad, the emergence of AUKUS, the emergence of Squad, which I will talk about now, all of that is also creating a kind of sense of fear and under siege in Chinese strategic thinkers. But from the readouts, there are a few things that stand out. The readout, to me, read like an internet provider convention. It looked as if 4 companies that provide internet connection globally have come together to talk about cables under the water, research centers about connectivity, and to talk about artificial intelligence, etc. There was no talk about hard power. No talk about the balances of power, no net assessment of how powerful China is and how threatening it is. So to me, it looked like a very, like a convention of internet providers in the region rather than a military alliance, and primarily because of India. In fact, in the entire readout, there was no mention of China directly at all. There was indirect mention of North Korean missiles. There was also mention of Russian aggression in the context of saying that the world is quite unstable. And so they pointed to Russian aggression in Ukraine, North Korean missiles, and then use of Coast Guard ships, etc., aggressively referring to China's exchanges with Philippines, but without mentioning China. And they point to these as examples, along with what's happening in the Middle East, that we live in a very uncertain world, and the purpose of Quad is to try and bring some stability and predictability in these uncertain circumstances. But there was no mention of China. I also suspect that while the United States and maybe even Japan would like to mention, Japan is also heavily investing in China even as they speak. So there is an incentive for them to not make China angry, and so they're not mentioning China. But I also suspect that India is primarily the entity which is saying, let's not go ballistic on China, because India is trying to normalize its relations on the border with China. And the 2 meetings that Dr. Jaishankar had with Wang Yi would become kind of negated if the statement that India would sign up to by the Quad was extremely critical of China. So that's why it looks very, it doesn't have an edge. There's no edge to it, to the statement that these countries have put out. As I said, they talk about sharing vaccines. Jaishankar is still talking about India sending COVID vaccines to poor countries. They talk about cooperation, talk about relief operations on the crisis of helping PNG, and these are the kind of things they talked about. There was, of course, Blinken did bring up Venezuela and the Middle East. Quite, as they would say in India, this is out of syllabus. Why are you bringing these issues up? But anyway, as I said, the instinct to be global is so inherent to us Americans that we can't stop talking about global issues, even though we are attending a regionally focused organizations or forums convention. But there was one reference to something that you could call remotely hard power. And that was the US talking about capacity building in the context of awareness, about the maritime awareness about Indo-Pacific. So what they're basically talking about is intelligence sharing, building capacities to basically monitor movements along in the Indo-Pacific region, and basically to prevent aggressive behavior by China. But they use so many euphemisms in talking about its awareness. I thought this is Sufism coming into geopolitics. Know thyself and you will know God, kind of thing, you know. So trying to encourage use of euphemism. Let's be aware of our oceans. that kind of language, rather than saying that we have intelligence capacity now that the United States is building in its Quad partners to focus on China's Navy, its activities. The most startling thing to me was that there was no mention of Taiwan at all. And there was no mention of India-China's border. So the very things that these Quad countries are there for in the Quad were not discussed. So why aren't they talking about China's aggressive conduct towards Taiwan? Is Taiwan irrelevant to the Indo-Pacific strategy? Who pushed it out? Is India or Japan or Australia telling the US, let's not talk about Taiwan in this issue? So that is why I think the Quad is losing its fizz, and of course the fact that we don't even have a date of the Quad leaders meeting. The US is saying that yes, it's committed, and now that Joe Biden is not running for elections, is not contesting for the US presidency for a second term, he has a lot of time on his hand. He's more or less a lame duck president. So he does plan to come to India for the leaders convention of the Quad, but there is no date yet. Tentatively, it's supposed to be in December, but I guess once we get close to the date, suddenly people may discover, oh, there's Christmas in December. Like this, suddenly they realize in September that Australia Day is also around 25th, 26th of January. When they were planning it, additionally, apparently nobody in the Quad countries knew about it. So they had scheduled a meeting, which was then did not happen because the Australian Prime Minister and the US President could not come. But anyway, so I basically think that the momentum of the Quad that was gathering so much speed in 2024, 2023 is not visible in 2024. There were many things happening. See, the US-India relations were also moving at a very rapid pace. Prime Minister Modi came to Washington, D.C., Joe Biden went to India, and there was a lot of discussion of advanced technology sharing, etc. We don't see that, as they would say in India, garma garmi, that intensity in the relationship anymore. That's why it feels like that you open the Coke bottle and left it for several hours and the fizz is gone out of that strategy. There are two other reasons why I feel that the Quad is losing its fizz. Number one, the United States has now created an alternative to Quad, which is called the Squad. And the Squad is essentially the same three partners of the Quad: Australia, Japan, and US, and Philippines has been added to it. Now, you must understand that the relationships with the United States that these countries have are not the same. So, for example, the point that I want to make is this, that Japan and Australia have military partnerships. They are military allies of the US. India is not. And bringing Philippines in and not India in the Squad, which means the Philippines also has a military understanding with the US. So now suddenly the Squad is a military operation seeking to contain China. Now it is quite possible that the Squad might be limited only to East Asia or the region around Philippines and not the entire Indo-Pacific. But nevertheless, the US has now another tool to push back against China, which is the Squad. And therefore, I think it definitely takes the fizz out of the Quad. If the Quad is not going to talk about military issues and they're going to talk about connectivity and internet and underwater internet cables, etc., and artificial intelligence, then that's fine. The US benefits from that also in some ways. But then the Quad is not the only game in town. Now there is a Squad which has an edge to it because it is a military alliance with the US. So it's not that they don't have a shared, it's not a collective security arrangement. It's like a spokes and a hub. It's like a wheel. The US is in the center and it has independent relations with all the other three members of the Squad. Now, people in India are writing articles like this one by Rahul Sharma, which says the Squad is a welcome spin-off, but the Quad is the main game. I'm not very sure. If the game is defined as broad cooperation, then yes. But if you're talking about it as a military spearhead of U.S. response to China, then the Quad is more likely to be the sharp edge of U.S. intervention in the region than Quad. Yes, Philippines is not a substitute to India. Philippines is a country of 100 million people with less than $500 million of $500 billion or less of GDP, and India is a massive country, the world's biggest country in terms of population and the world's fifth biggest economy. So yes, India brings a lot of heft to the Quad, but if it doesn't become a military alliance, then the Quad is not as a spearhead that Quad can be. But there's another development that I find fascinating, which was announced today. The United States is going to revamp its military forces in Japan. And this is considered as a historic move. So there are lots of technical military, essentially, changes that are going to take place. But basically what it means is the whole of Japan has now become a major military base of the United States. So the US will now be able to actually organize military activities straight out of Japan, and you have to not wait to what's happening at the Pentagon or other places. So in this sense, you could say that Japan has really committed to becoming not just a junior partner of the United States in this defense arrangement, but essentially the springboard from where the United States, if it were to get into a war with China, will be fighting. So Japan will be the base of the United States in this major war, if there is a war with China. So unlike India, which can say, okay, if there's a war between the US and China, India need not get involved in it. India can say, we are not a military ally. We will condemn aggression by any party. This is not an era of war. But Japan has, I suppose, now completely given that option up. Japan is now going to be the base of operations for US military operations. So even if China attacks Taiwan, the US probably would be responding to China if the US chooses to do so from Japan. But let's wait and see what happens in the US elections. I'm not very sure that Donald Trump will like this. Of course, he's very anti-China, so he may like it. We don't know that. But if some of his aides say, sir, this whole thing that we are doing in the Indo-Pacific is just Asia, NATO expansion, if they put it in those words, I think he will be quite unhappy about it. So anyway, so here is my submission to you, that it appears as if the Quad is losing its fizz, and the US now has more options than the Quad in dealing with China in the region. It has a Quad, it has an AUKUS, and now it has a more integrated Japan in its defense operations. So I hope you found this conversation interesting, thought-provoking. So please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, and press the bell icon. And until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.